Hey everybody, this is Drop Stitches Podcast, episode something or another, September 4th, I think, 2017. It's Monday, Labor Day in the United States. I am Julia, also known as Sapphire Child on Ravelry, and you can also find me on Instagram as julia.redman. Thank you for joining me today. If it's your first time, welcome. If you're coming back, welcome back, and all those other lovely things. I'm going to give you a little bit of a warning today, a couple of warnings. We're not actually going to discuss any knitting today or fibery related things. I'm doing plants today. And my second warning is that I'm really incredibly grouchy, and it's entirely probable that I'm going to swear during the course of this recording. So if you're sensitive or you got little ones, you might want to come back later or just not watch this one. That is your call. I'll try not to make it too bad, but I'm in a bad mood. Anyway, but I wanted to record something in order to, try to be social, and also to share some things with you that I've been working on or that I've been interested in lately, and hopefully you can benefit from it if you can stand to listen to me. Anyway, so what I'm doing today is I'm going to be trying to put together some kind of terrarium type things, mainly with some Tillandsias. I've been interested in some Tillandsias recently, and Tillandsias are, you may also know the name air plant, little bitty things like this, but they can also be very large things. Now, most Tillandsia species are epiphytic, and they're largely rootless. I wouldn't say completely rootless, and the purpose of the roots is a little different than some other plants, even orchids. Now, there are a few Tillandsias that need to be rooted into something and need to have, they do want to be in a pot, but a lot of Tillandsias prefer to be mounted, or you'll even see people like just, grow them in a little cup or whatever, and you hose them down a few times a week, depending upon the species and depending upon the environment that you're growing them in. I guess I should also remind you that we are recording in my basement. And the water equipment is right behind me, which means that you might hear some strange noises at some point. And, my rabbit's down here and stuff, but he doesn't really make that much noise. Anyway, Tillandsias. Yeah, so they're epiphytic plants, which means that in nature you usually find them like on a tree somewhere. This is not the same thing as being a parasite. They're just clinging to the tree as a way to get closer to the sun, have better resources, what have you, which is pretty common in a tropical environment, these are from, generally from tropical environments. Caveat is that some of them are from higher elevation tropical environments, so they do like, certain ones want to be hot and humid, and some maybe want to be a little cooler and humid. But that said, I don't think that there's any, there's a lot of Tillandsia species. I'm not really well versed on all of them, so I couldn't tell you for certain that that they are all from lower, relatively lower elevation, but as far as I know, there's none that are like truly alpine species, which is something that you run into with orchids, where you have, truly cool growing plants. I don't think there's any that are really truly cool growing. At least not any that are common in cultivation. Maybe that's the key. So this little guy that I have in my hand is called Bootsii, and I'm not an expert in Tillandsias, but I've been kind of interested in them recently, and I've been looking at trying to learn a bit more. So I'm going to share with you what I've learned so far. In general, when you see a plant that is more green and smooth, like Bootsii, You're talking about something that wants a little bit lower light and much higher humidity around it. And again, you're not going to be potting this. So higher humidity means the environment in general, and it also means more frequent watering. But although this is a bromeliad, by the way, these are not tank bromeliads, which means that they want to drain out the water that gets into these leaf axils. So you will occasionally see Tillandsias that, this one's not a great example. The rest of the batch is soaking in that yellow bucket over there. So when they're kind of bulbous at the base, you want to be able to, let them drain out after they've had a soak. And sometimes that means just, sitting it in such a way or shaking it out, or it could mean, physically mounting it kind of upside down. Let's see, do I still have my notes open on these? There are a couple of species that are not responsive to gravity. Bootsii wasn't, it didn't say about Bootsii, so it probably is responsive to gravity. Bulbosa, which is a little bit more bulbous, is a geotropic, which means that it does not care which direction you've mounted it. It's just going to do its thing. And it's not going to try to right itself at all, so we'll probably see him later. I should probably take them out so they can dry a little bit. So, a little bit more humid, a little bit lower light. They still want a little bit of sun, by the way. Don't think you can leave it on your dining room table. I'm looking at you. None of that. Maybe an hour or two of morning sun. Probably what you're talking about for these. And then there are some Tillandsias that are very silver. They have a lot of what's called trichomes on the leaves. Makes them look hairy, or makes them look like dusty. And it's trichomes are super fascinating. If you're a nerd like myself, they're fun to look at under a microscope. They generally are, at least the ones I've looked at. I haven't looked at every plant, but in general, I think trichomes are a single cell, and which kind of grows up and can be branched out. So it's a very strangely shaped cell, but it's a single cell, so it's a really tiny little thing. But they have various jobs on plants. For some plants, it's a matter of protecting the leaf surface from wind. So we'll keep it, from drying out, or protecting it from excess light. So in high light situations, you might see more trichomes on a plant, or they'll be adapted in such a way. And certainly both of those things occur in Tillandsias, where plants that are native to drier, brighter environments will have more trichomes, and therefore you should take that as a sign that if you pick up a plant and it's very, very silver, it's probably built to withstand higher light and a little bit less humidity. Therefore, you would say that in general, those with more trichomes that are more silver are better adapted to the home environment, which is generally very dry. Now, that said, you still have to consider the higher light. And, I'm just kind of guessing here, but I think higher light can generally mean, maybe 3-4 hours of sun. I don't know if there's any that really come in, that live in, no, I think there are. There definitely are some that get exposure to full sun. Spanish moss is a Tillandsia, and they're in full sun frequently. Xerophytica, that's a name that should ring some bells for those of you that have worked with plants or know some Latin. it is from a super desert environment, and I think that those can take really highlight. Some pictures I've seen have suggested this to me, and some of the others maybe as well. I think they can adapt to less light. They seem to do okay in the home environment. They might not flower if they don't get super highlight. But certainly worth some experimentation. So yeah, so the trichomes serve those purposes in plants that come from those kinds of environment. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, Spanish moss comes from environments like Georgia, which are very humid. True. This whole concept of more or less is relative, right? So it's not like an absolute no humidity. It's, you know, in general, maybe a little bit less. Whereas, you know, if you have a vivarium or a terrarium, these little guys are good cases for that because they're going to need extra help for certain. And so that's kind of the thing we're doing today. That said, you can also grow those other kinds of things in terrariums too, as long as they're not closed or that you have a little fan in there so that they don't rot. You know, they'll have things like that will have more problems with rot in a closed environment. So, relative. Let's see, so what else? Tillandsias, now, like I was saying, their roots don't quite serve the same purpose that most other plants do with their roots, which is to gather moisture and water. Tillandsia roots, if they have them, and they will have more of them in a higher humidity environment, which is useful, they generally don't seem to play much of a role in taking up water. Supposedly, that's what people say. And certainly if you can have a plant survive and flower without any roots, they can't be serving a critical purpose. So instead, they take up moisture and nutrition through their leaves, and probably with the aid of those trichomes. So again, we think about plants with more trichomes. They're looking to catch more water when it comes along. And the further they are, probably the less you want to be seriously soaking them. And soaking them is a common way for watering your tillandsias if you're growing them like loose in your house. Now, if you're growing them in a enclosed or partially enclosed environment, you probably wouldn't be soaking them or just spraying them, and you would be using the ambient humidity to try to keep them from drying out. Now, if a plant gets truly desiccated, you have no choice but to soak it, or it's going to croak, right? It's not foolproof, right? You got to water them. But they don't need to be fed a whole lot. They're not heavy feeders. Most tillandsias, when they're really desiccated, their leaves will cup a little bit. And there are a few that when they're really desiccated, their leaves curl. And, you know, again, it's an adaptation to try to, you know, hold in and reduce airflow across the leaf and reduce water loss. And so, you know, you soak them for a good long time, get them well hydrated, and then they'll be fine in general. So my experience with little guys is that if you can get one in your garden center that has some roots and specifically has live roots. Those are not live roots, by the way. See, they're kind of brown and crunchy. They're not live roots. But I can show you some with live roots. Please hold. Soaking in the bucket here. Oh, shit. That's okay. It's just a leaf. We've got a bunch of little tillandsias that are ready to be mounted. Shake it dry a little bit. Okay. This little guy He's totally soaked, so you can't really see what he looks like, but the species is Streptophylla. This is one of these that curls more when it's dry, and you see the leaves are kind of open right now. It's because it's pretty well hydrated. And you can see that it has a few roots. Most of them are kind of dry and crunchy. But can you see right there in the middle, there's one that's really bright in color. It's kind of a really pale green color. There's two of them actually. Can you see those? You squint really hard maybe, if I can figure out how to get this in front of the camera properly. Yeah, oh, you get the gist. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for roots that look fresh. They look kind of green, and when they're dry, you know, when the plant hasn't just come out of water, those roots are going to have like a differently colored tip usually, which I'll show you on this guy when I pull him out. There's a few others in here. There's a cool one. That's good. There we go. Here's bulbosa. That's the one that's ageotropic. So it looks very similar. Get water everywhere. I can't be killing this computer. I paid for it. It's not my work computer. Let's see what else we got here. I've got a few things in here, which we'll see, but this one doesn't have it. I thought this one had, maybe I killed it. This one had roots on it, I think. And the species is Funkiana. Or some similar pronunciation. And these are stoloniferous, and you know, they just kind of grow longer. Oh, I should have brought the one down here with the pup. Maybe I'll get it later. I need to pull the tag off of some of these because it's like kind of cramping their style. So this is Argentina. A nickel to whoever guesses where that's from. Isn't that a cute little guy? Very bulbous structure there that can also hold water, and that thin leaf structure too. That's going to reduce water loss. So it has slightly different adaptations for maintaining moisture levels in the plant. It does have a root. Okay, good. Let's see. I don't think I have any here with good sized pups on them, because none of these are really flowering size. But anyway, so what Tillandsias do is this one has flowered. You can see where there's like a little crust of flower in there, but they and it's only starting to produce a pup, so you won't be able to really see it on camera. But what happens is that, you know, they flower generally out of the center, and then they start forming pups in the leaf axils, and it can be one to many. And generally, each rosette only flowers once, and then you're reliant on the pups. But to be your next flowering, in the central rosette will over time die off, which isn't horrific, you know. It's the way of several kinds of plants, Paphiopedilums and orchids for one. And agaves, it's not uncommon in agaves, I think. Anyway, so, and you know, if they're doing well, and if you have a pretty aggressive plant, you can end up with a big ball of plant, you know, each of them being kind of small, but still very cute. Anyway, let me shove this out of the way here, and I'll tell you about the kinds of things that we're working with here. We've got some glass containers that came from Goodwill. A 10-gallon aquarium that I picked up off the side of the road. I'm classy. Some driftwood pieces that I paid actual money for. They sell these for mounting orchids and other things. You'll find the most selection from orchid suppliers. But sometimes places that do like terrarium kind of stuff will have driftwood or cork bark or like grape vine stuff, other things. And you can also mount them to the outside of clay pots. That works too. And some of them can be mounted on rocks. Although this works better with some species than others. Some of them actually grow this way in nature. Ditto orchids, certain species. I did a bit of research on, and you're getting the gist that I have a variety of species here because I'm interested in learning more about the genus. And I did do a bit of research online. You know, there's not a whole lot out there. It's mostly when you look up information about Tillandsias, it's highly generic. You know, it's just like soak it once or twice a week and blah, blah, blah. Kind of like keep it in low light, which kind of doesn't mean anything. So it was hard to really find some stuff. But there were a few websites that had some information that were somewhat helpful, like the Argentina species, for example. That one comes from seasonally dry forests. Not a surprise, right? It comes from Argentina, and certain areas in Argentina have seasonally dry climate, right? So that means that certain times of the year the plant is going to have a dry breast. And the challenge for me is that I'm probably going to stick most of them in that aquarium, and I need to kind of refer to my notes periodically, or I'm going to end up killing some of them. But the other thing that I can do is, you know, mount them at different heights in the terrarium, and you know, we'll see what happens. I've got a couple other Tillandsias floating around the house in various places, like jammed on top of other things that are mounted, or like sitting on top of pots. They're not exactly potted, just kind of sitting there, hanging out with the plants. So far, okay. I did have a couple crop out, but I've had some successes as well. And one of them was this guy right here, which is Humula, something like that, which is a species that used to be classed with the species that's super common, which is called Iowantha, which you'll see everywhere, and it's incredibly prolific. And what did I read about Humula? It's a Humilela something. Oh, yeah, I didn't really find anything useful. Yeah. And even about Iowantha, it's super common, but what did I find? Part sun, part shade, part damp. Warm. Thanks. You know, the funny thing about growing plants is you can read all the stuff you want, and quite frankly, the the most useful stuff is about where would you find it in nature. Is it like deep under the tree in the shade, or is it out on the edges? Is it hanging over a river? Is it high elevation? Is it low elevation, or what have you? These things tell you some things about what kind of life it lives in the wild. These are all, as far as I know, all captive bred, but still, you know, they come with their own set of expectations. But everything after that is guesswork and happenstance. You get lucky or you don't. But anyway, so this has been in this terrarium for a while. Not a super long while, maybe about a year. And, you know, there's some rocks in the bottom, and there's a price tag. This one I actually paid money for. I didn't get it from Goodwill. Some sphagnum moss, and then there's some driftwood pieces there, and it got the plant shoved on top. And it has rooted nicely to that piece of driftwood. And it's part of the reason that I formed this idea that if you can find a Tillandsia that has little roots on it, you're more likely to have success with it. And I don't think it's necessarily because it has roots. I think it's more an indicator that the plant is healthy and in really good condition, which is sometimes hard to tell with Tillandsias, particularly when you're first getting started out. You know, they like small creatures, they hide their problems, right? And they can just fall apart suddenly, and you can be totally unprepared for it. So if you look, pick up every plant, look for those little roots in the bottom, live ones. It's an indicator the plant is healthy, it's been doing well, and it's been treated well since before, you know, in the time before you got to it. Because, you know, you buy these things at garden centers. The garden centers didn't breed these. They bought them wholesale. And they don't necessarily know how to take care of them. And, sorry, I don't mean to be banging on some garden centers, but I've seen some stuff lately. And I'm sure you all have if you've grown plants. And some places are better than others. But, you know, if you're not buying from another hobbyist, you got to assume that they really don't know how to take care of plants. There's probably like 3 guys there, 3 people, whatever, that can grow some plants, and they're all going to have a specialty, right? So not everybody knows everything, and at least half of their employees are just people they hired off the street to do grunt work. It's the reality of it. Some of them pick things up, some of them don't. Some of them repeat things that they've heard, and sometimes that stuff is wrong. So do your research. And be prepared to experiment. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, I did have some other things in this jar. I had a couple other Tillandsias in it, which look okay, not as great as that one, but they're not dead. This one actually, I lost the tag for this one. I might still have it upstairs somewhere. This one was in flower when I bought it. It's not dead yet. And I don't know if you can tell, but it does have, that's a new young rosette coming up. Now it only has the one, but it's not dead. So we'll go with that. I also have some tomb sticks. You see those 2 labels in there? This plant was cheap. This plant was cheap. The ones I paid serious money for, they're dead. So this is an experiment that failed. And that's why we call this a tomb stick, because sadly, that's a $25 plant that's now dead. And so it was a little bulbophyllum, which is an orchid species. And sadly, ceropetalum. Al's gonna cringe. I bought this from him. I'm sorry, but I killed it. And I have totally lost my mojo with bulbophyllums and ceropetalums in the last few years. I used to have several. These are both miniature species. And what I was doing here was trying to figure out how I could manage them here. I've had trouble with these things since I moved here. Maybe it's my water quality. I don't know. Maybe it's stress levels. I don't know. I'm not doing something. And so maybe no more buying of bulbophyllums for me for a while. Serpetalum is essentially bulbophyllum. And it's really a shame because this one right here, totally love this species. It's adorable. If you want to see pictures, look it up. Internet Orchid Species Encyclopedia, IOSPE. Pictures of all the things, or just Google it. They're adorable. Anyway, so I'm just going to pull this apart, and oh yeah, I forgot, I shoved some wine corks under there to kind of lift these up a little bit. I'll just throw that in there for a moment. Well, it's not rotten. That's good. So this has a little bit of sphagnum under it. That is not necessarily required when mounting Tillandsias. I did it as a course of habit, and it does help, you know, delay drying out of the plant a little bit because of the fact that there's a little bit of a moisture reserve right there close to it. You can see this root that's come down, that's totally new. And then these guys are really well attached. This one, I don't know what his deal is. He hasn't decided where he's going to sit yet. But these guys are totally well attached. And I do have it tied because you can see that it's rocking a little bit. It's really only attached right there. And I didn't want it to fall off and damage those two little roots. So I'm hoping that this root is just going to decide it wants to attach there and just get on with life. So this will be moving into the aquarium along with most of the things that I've got in this yellow bucket, but a small selection of things that want higher humidity are either going to end up in this gigantic brandy sniffer doodad or this closable terrarium that I have over in the back there. I'm probably gonna have various pieces of driftwood and rocks and things, and I'm just gonna do something similar to what I had here, arrange everybody in there and tie them on, and we'll see how that goes. And then I may tie on some orchids and stick some carnivorous plants in the bottom to, you know, soak up moisture. So we'll see. Wish me luck. I'm going to turn off the video now so that you don't have to listen to me yammer for the next hour and a half.